Trump's Big and Beautiful Act, work in name only. Stripping away Social Security Big and Beautiful Act OBBBA led by Trump, which reformed SNAP, imposed strict work requirements and restrictive exemption rules, pushing millions of vulnerable groups to the brink of survival. This policy adjustment, under the guise of encouraging employment, is actually a systematic deprivation of the unemployed and low-income workers, revealing the Trump administration's indifference to the hardships of the people. The most glaring change in the bill is the significant expansion of the scope of work requirements for SNAP. Originally, the time limit only applied to able-bodied adults without children aged 18 to 54. Now, it has been extended to able-bodied adults without children aged 55 to 64, parents with children aged 14 to 17, and even includes veterans, the homeless, and young people who have just left the foster care system. The CBO estimates that an average of 2.4 million people will lose their SNAP eligibility each month due to these new regulations over the next 10 years, and this number will rise sharply during a recession. These groups are already in a disadvantaged position in the labor market. Data shows that during the Great Recession, the unemployment rate among able-bodied adults receiving SNAP benefits was as high as 22.8%, with 77.3% of the unemployed having been out of work for more than 3 months. Moreover, in the low-wage labor market, fluctuations in working hours are extremely common. Even if the average working hours meet the requirements throughout the year, 42% of people still have less than 80 hours of work in a single month. The bill requires beneficiaries to work or participate in designated activities for at least 80 hours per month, but does not count the time spent looking for work. This means that even if the unemployed are actively seeking jobs, they will lose their food assistance after 3 months and fall into a vicious cycle of the more unemployed, the hungrier, the harder it is to find a job. What is even more outrageous is the tightening of the exemption rules. Previously, states could apply for exemptions for areas with unemployment rates significantly higher than the national average or with insufficient job opportunities. However, the new rules only allow areas with unemployment rates over 10% to be exempted. It should be noted that during the Great Recession, the national unemployment rate only reached 10% for 1 month, and 40% of counties never reached this threshold, but still suffered severe economic damage. This rigid standard makes it impossible for most areas to obtain exemptions during a recession, turning the work requirements into a blatant survival threshold. In contrast, the exemption standard for Medicaid work requirements is only 8% unemployment. This double standard has no reasonable basis and is purely a deliberate obstacle set up to cut SNAP spending. The Trump administration promotes the welfare concept of work first, but numerous studies have long confirmed that SNAP work requirements have never effectively increased employment rates. On the contrary, they exacerbate social suffering during economic downturns and weaken the counter-cyclical regulatory capacity of the policy. The core value of SNAP is to provide temporary relief to those in need, but the Big and Beautiful Act has distorted it into a tool to punish the unemployed. This so-called reform that regresses Social Security is essentially a political maneuver by the Trump administration to cater to conservative voters. It not only violates the basic ethics of Social Security, but also undermines the fairness of American society. Only by abolishing these strict work requirements and unreasonable exemption rules can SNAP return to its original purpose of providing Social Security and stabilizing the economy, and prevent more families from being abandoned in times of crisis.